Général, vous pouvez vous asseoir.
You may be seated, General.
Je voudrais tout d'abord
First of all, I would like to say good afternoon to the people working in the technical booth and to be sure that everybody can hear me. General, do you hear me?
Yes.
Ok, très bien.
Very well, thank you. I would also say good afternoon to the public following our proceedings. This is a pretrial part of the trial. That is the initial appearance of General Strugar, which is covered by Rule 62 of the rules. Madam Registrar, would you please call the case?
Good afternoon, Your Honor. This is case number IT 0142I, the prosecutor versus Pavle Strugar.
Okay.
Thank you. I now turn to the prosecution. Madam, would you please give us the appearances for the prosecution?
Joanna Corner and Marie Tuma are helped by Ms. Valpeter for the prosecution, Your Honor.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. I now turn to the defense. Would you introduce yourself, sir? Tell us what bar you are a member of and what your credentials are to appear at the tribunal.
Dobar dan, časni sude.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. I'm Goran Rodic, counselor from Podgorica, from the Montenegrin bar. And before this tribunal, I worked as a legal counselor in the case of Kvochka and others, assisting counsel Prcac, and I also worked on the defense of Damir Doshan, and I am now acting as counselor for Mr. Pavle Strugar.
Thank you very much. You may now be seated. Madam Registrar, are Mr. Rodic's credentials in order?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, merci. Thank you. Mr. Rodic, has General Strugar received a copy of the indictment in his own language? And were you able to read and explain the charges against him?
Vaša visosti.
Your Honor, upon his arrival to The Hague, Mr. Strugar has been in the detention unit, and on the 21st of October he received the original of the indictment, and he has studied this copy in detail. We did this together, and as he communicated to me, he understands all the elements of the indictment, all the charges, and he is aware of all these facts.
Très bien.
Very well, you may be seated. Thank you. I now turn to the General who's appearing today further to an indictment against him. General Strugar, would you rise, please? Would you answer the following questions that I'm going to ask? What is your family name and your given name?
Časni sude.
Your Honors, my name is Pavle Strugar.
Could you tell us the date and place of your birth?
Rođen sam
I was born on the 13th of July, 1933, in Peć, in present-day Kosovo.
Et quelle est
What was your profession before your retirement?
moje zanimanje
Before I retired, I was a professional soldier, lieutenant general by rank.
et quelle est
What was your residence before coming here, General Strugar?
ja sam sa mestom boravka u Podgorici.
I resided in Podgorica. My sons are in Belgrade, so that my wife and I, who are both old people, often spend time in Belgrade.
donc
From what you are saying, I understand that you are married and that you have children. Is that correct?
Tako je.
That is correct. I have 2 sons.
bien?
Very well. You may be seated, General.
Aujourd'hui,
General Strugar, this is your initial appearance before the tribunal. It is a formality, of course, but it is important, and you must be present here with your counsel because you have the opportunity to hear the charges which the Office of the Prosecutor has made against you. So that things are clear, I will first ask the registrar to recall the constituent texts which give to you a certain number of rights and which will then allow us to move into the formality of this present appearance. Madam Registrar, would you read the relevant text, that is Article 20, 21 of the statute, and Rule 62 of the rules?
Yes, Mr. President. Article 20, commencement and conduct of trial proceedings. The trial chambers shall ensure that a trial is fair and expeditious and that proceedings are conducted in accordance with the rules of procedure and evidence, with full respect for the rights of the accused and due regard for the protection of victim and witnesses. A person against whom an indictment has been confirmed shall, pursuant to an order or an arrest warrant of the International Tribunal, be taken into custody, immediately informed of the charges against him, and transferred to the International Tribunal. The trial chamber shall read the indictment, satisfy itself that the rights of the accused are respected, confirm that the accused understands the indictment, and instructs the accused to enter a plea. The trial chamber shall then set the date for trial. The hearings shall be public unless the trial chamber decides to close the proceedings in accordance with its rules and procedures. Article 21, rights of the accused. All persons shall be equal before the International Tribunal. In the determination of charges against him, the accused shall be entitled to a fair and public hearing, subject to Article 22 of the statute. The accused shall be presumed innocent until proven guilty, according to the provisions of the present statute. In the determination of any charge against the accused pursuant to the present statute, the accused shall be entitled to the following minimum guarantees in full equality. A, to be informed promptly and in detail in a language which he understands of the nature and cause of the charge against him. B, to have adequate time and facilities for the preparation of his defense and to communicate with counsel of his own choosing. C, to be tried without undue delay. D, to be tried in his presence and to defend himself in person or through legal assistance of his own choosing, to be informed, if he does not have legal counsel, of this right, and to have legal assistance assigned to him in any case where the interests of justice so require, and without payment by him in any such case, if he does not have sufficient means to pay for it. E, to examine or have examined the witnesses against him and to obtain the attendance and examination of witnesses on his behalf under the same conditions as witnesses against him. F, to have the free assistance of an interpreter if he cannot understand or speak the language of the International Tribunal. G, not to be compelled to testify against himself or to confess guilt.
Generaal Strugar, veuillez vous lever.
General Strugar, would you rise, please? We are now going to move into the major formality of this appearance of yours today, which is to know whether you wish to plead guilty or not guilty to each of the counts. However, before that, I have to ask you a few questions. General, have you received the indictment in your own language?
Da, časni sude, primio sam.
Yes, Your Honor, I have received the indictment in the Serbian language.
Have you understood the contents of the indictment?
Razumeo sam sadržaj.
Yes, I have.
Avez-vous
Have you been able to discuss it with your attorney?
Da, razgovarali smo.
Yes, we discussed it several times and the indictment is clear to me.
êtes-vous prêt au...
Are you prepared today to tell us whether you are pleading guilty or not guilty to each count, or would you prefer to do this within the next 30 days?
Časni sude,
Your Honor, I have read the indictment in its entirety. It is clear to me, and I plead not guilty.
Non, ça veut dire...
This means, General, that you agreed to plead today. Am I to understand that?
ja bih hteo danas da...
Yes, I would like to plead today.
Very well. Are you going to plead to all the counts, or only to one or several of them?
Ja sam spreman da se...
I'm ready to plead on all counts of the indictment.
Sam
Très bien.
nevin.
Time to plead not guilty.
Donc, pour l'instant,
For the moment, you may be seated, General. I now turn to Mr. Redic to make a proposal. I suggest that we proceed as follows. The registrar will read parts of the indictment, and when we reach the counts, I will ask the general whether he is pleading guilty or not guilty. Do you agree with that way of proceeding, Mr. Radic?
Vaša visost,
Your Honor, the defense agrees with this proposal completely.
Bien.
Very well. Is there any objection by the prosecutor? Madam Coroner?
No, Your Honor.
OK. Très bien. Donc,
Madam Registrar, would you please read out the indictment, and by that I mean the short introduction and the following paragraphs: 1, 5, 9 to 21, 23 to 27, 29 to 31, and 33 to 36.
Yes, Your Honor. The prosecutor of the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, pursuant to her authority under Article 18 of the Statute of the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, the Statute of the Tribunal charges Pavle Strugar and others with grave breaches of the Geneva Conventions and violations of the laws or customs of war as set forth below. Pavle Strugar was born on the 13th of July, 1933 in Peć, in present-day Kosovo. He graduated from the Military Academy for the Ground Forces in 1952 and was thereafter assigned to various Yugoslav People's Army, the JNA, posts in Slovenia and Serbia. He subsequently was promoted to Major General and was named commander of the Military Academy for Ground Forces. In 1987, he was made the commander of Territorial Defense Forces in Montenegro. In December 1989, he was promoted to Lieutenant General. In October 1991, he was named as the commander of the 2nd Operational Group, which was formed by the JNA to conduct the military campaign against Dubrovnik region of Croatia. On August 26, 1993, he was retired from the Yugoslav Army, the VJ. Individual criminal responsibility. As commander of the JNA 2nd Operational Group set up to conduct the Dubrovnik campaign, General Pavle Strugar exercised both formal and de facto power over the forces under his command. The various component forces of the JNA involved in the Dubrovnik campaign were organized into the 2nd Operational Group, which was formed from the headquarters of the Montenegrin Territorial Defense in Titograd, now Podgorica. The commander of the operational group was Lieutenant General Pavle Strugar. His deputy was Colonel Radomir Damjanovic, who is now deceased. The operational group headquarters were established at Treblinka, Bosnia-Herzegovina. The primary components of the 2nd Operational Group were the 2nd Titograd Corps and the 9th VPS, augmented by Montenegrin Territorial Defense Forces. Although these forces were comprised of approximately 20,000 to 35,000 troops. As an officer in a command function in the JNA, Pavle Strugar was bound by the regulations of the JNA as set out in the Strategy of Armed Conflict, 1983, the Law on All People's Defense, 1982, the Law on Service in the Armed Forces, 1985, the Rules of Service, 1985, and the Regulations on the Application of the International Law of War on the Armed Forces of the SFRI, 1988. These regulations governed the roles and responsibility of JNA officers, set out their position in the chain of command and obligated this officer and his subordinates to observe the laws of war. General allegations. All acts and omissions alleged in this indictment occurred between the 1st of October and the 31st of December 1991 of the territory of the Republic of Croatia. At all times relevant to this indictment, a state of international armed conflict and partial occupation existed in Croatia. All acts and omissions charged as grave breaches of the Geneva Conventions of 1949 occurred during the armed conflict and partial occupation of Croatia. At all times relevant to this indictment, Pavle Strugar and others were required to abide by the laws and customs of armed conflicts, including the Geneva Conventions of 1949 and the additional protocols thereto. Pavle Strugar and others are individually responsible for the crimes alleged against them in this indictment, pursuant to Article 7.1 of the Statute of the Tribunal. Individual criminal responsibility, including planning, instigating, ordering, committing, or otherwise aiding and abetting in the planning, preparation, or execution of any crimes referred to in Articles 2 to 5 of the Statute of the Tribunal. Pavle Strugar, while holding the positions of superior authority as set out in the preceding paragraph, is also criminally responsible for the acts of his subordinates pursuant to Article 7.3 of the Statute of the Tribunal. A superior is responsible for the acts of his subordinates if he knew or had reason to know that his subordinates were about to commit such acts or had done so, and the superior failed to take the necessary and reasonable measures to prevent such acts or to punish the perpetrators thereof. Counts. Between the 1st of October 1991 and the 7th of December 1991, Pavle Strugar, acting individually or in concert with others, participated in the below charged crimes in order to secure control of those areas of Croatia that were intended for inclusion in the so-called Dubrovnik Republic. It was the objective of the JNA and the Serbian and the Montenegrin governments to detach this area from Croatia and to annex it to Serbia, Montenegro, and other areas intended for Serb control in Croatia and Bosnia. The area designated by the Serbian and Montenegrin governments as the Dubrovnik Republic included all of the territory of the municipality of Dubrovnik as it existed in 1991. The Dubrovnik region. This area comprised the coastal regions of Croatia between the town of Njum, Bosnia-Herzegovina in the northwest, and the Montenegrin border in the southeast. In order to achieve this objective, JNA forces under the command of Pavle Strugar and others launched an attack against the Dubrovnik region of Croatia from Montenegro, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and from the Adriatic Sea. The forces under their command included regular JNA Army, air and naval units, as well as territorial defense units from Montenegro, paramilitary units, and special police units that were subordinated to the JNA. The JNA forces commanded by Pavle Strugar and others, launched the attack against the Dubrovnik region on the 1st of October, 1991. The land attack was accompanied by the imposition of a blockade by the Yugoslav Navy. The JNA forces met little resistance from the lightly armed Croatian Defense Forces. The JNA seized territory to the southeast and northwest of the city of Dubrovnik and effectively surrounded the city itself within 2 weeks. Counts 1 to 9, murder, cruel treatment, attacks on civilians. From the 1st of October 1991 until the 6th of December 1991, Pavle Strugar, acting individually or in concert with others, planned, instigated, ordered, committed, or otherwise aided and abetted the killings of 43 civilians and the wounding of numerous others in and around the city of Dubrovnik through acts of unlawful shelling conducted by forces under his command. Included among these killed and wounded civilians are the victims of the attacks described in paragraphs 25, 26, and 27. The names of the deceased are set out in Schedule 1, which is attached to and made part of this indictment. The acts of shelling the city of Dubrovnik and its environs were perpetrated by JNA troops who controlled the high ground to the east and north of Dubrovnik. From Zarkovica and other locations above Dubrovnik, the JNA forces enjoyed an unobstructed view over the city. From these positions and from naval vessels offshore, the JNA engaged in acts of unlawful shelling of the city over a 2-month period. On the 7th of October, 1991, JNA forces under the command of Pavle Strugar and others shelled the town of Mokasica, a residential suburb of Dubrovnik. At the entrance to a civil defense shelter in Mokasica, 9 civilians were killed and numerous others were wounded by the JNA shelling. The names of the deceased are set out in Schedule 1, which is attached to and made part of this indictment. By these acts and omissions, Pavle Strugar participated in Count 1, murder, a violation of the laws or customs of war as recognized by Common Article 3.1a of the Geneva Conventions of 1949, punishable under Articles 3 and 7.1 and 7.3 of the Statute of the Tribunal.
General,
General, would you rise, please? Do you plead guilty or not guilty to count 1?
Časni sude,
Your Honor, I plead not guilty of this count.
u daljem postupku
In future proceedings, my defense counsel will prove to you that this is correct.
Very well. For the time being, we simply wish to know whether you are pleading guilty or not guilty. And you said that you were pleading not guilty. Please remain standing. Count 2, Madam Register.
Count 2, cruel treatment, a violation of the laws or customs of war as recognized by Common Article 3.1a of the Geneva Conventions of 1949, punishable under Articles 3 and 7.1 and 7.3 of the Statute of the Tribunal.
Général,
General, do you plead guilty or not guilty to that count? That is count 2.
Časni sude, nisam.
Your Honor, is not guilty.
très bien.
Very well. Count 3, please.
Count 3, attacks on civilians, a violation of the law or customs of war, as recognized by Article 51 of Additional Protocol 1 and Article 13 of Additional Protocol 2 to the Geneva Conventions of 1949, punishable under Articles 3 and 7.1 and 7.3 of the Statute of the Tribunal.
Général, plaidez-vous
General, do you plead guilty or not guilty to this count, count 3?
Časni sude,
Your Honor, I plead not guilty.
Vous pouvez
Very well. You may be seated now, General. Please continue, Madam Register.
Between the 9th and 12th of November 1991, JNA forces under the command of Pavle Strugar and others unlawfully shelled all areas of the city of Dubrovnik. 10 civilians were killed and numerous others were wounded by the JNA shelling. The names of the deceased are set out in Schedule 1, which is attached to and made part of this indictment. By these acts and omissions, Pavle Strugar participated in
Général,
General, would you rise, please?
murder, a violation of the laws or customs of war, as recognized by Common Article 3.1a of the Geneva Conventions of 1949, punishable under Articles 3 and 7.1 and 7.3 of the Statute of the Tribunal.
Général, plaidez-vous
General, do you plead guilty or not guilty to count 4?
časni sude, ja nisam.
Your Honor, I plead not guilty.
très bien.
Very well.
5, cruel treatment, a violation of the laws or customs of war, as recognized by Common Articles 3.1a of the Geneva Conventions of 1949, punishable under Articles 3 and 7.1 and 7.3 of the Statutes of the Tribunal.
Général,
General, do you plead guilty or not guilty to count 5?
Nisam kriv.
Not guilty.
bien.
Very well.
6, attacks on civilians, a violation of the laws or customs of war, as recognized by Article 51 of Additional Protocol 1 and Article 13 of Additional Protocol 2 to the Geneva Conventions of 1949, punishable under Articles 3 and 7.1 and 7.3 of the Statute of the Tribunal.
Général,
General Strugar, do you plead guilty or not guilty to count 6?
Časni sude, nisam.
Your Honor, I plead not guilty.
vous asseoir pour un instant.
You may be seated for the moment so that you can rest.
Hvala.
Continuez.
Thank you.
Please proceed, Madam Registrar.
On the 6th of December 1991, JNA forces under the command of Pavle Strugar and others unlawfully shelled all areas of the city of Dubrovnik. 14 civilians were killed and numerous others were wounded by the JNA shelling. The names of the deceased are set out in Schedule 1, which is attached to and made part of this indictment. By these acts and omissions, Pavle Strugar participated in
Vous pouvez vous lever.
Please rise, General.
Count 7, murder, a violation of the laws or customs of war, as recognized by Common Article 3.1a of the Geneva Convention of 1949, punishable under Articles 3 and 7.1 and 7.3 of the Statute of the Tribunal.
Génération.
General Strugar, do you plead guilty or not guilty to count 7?
Časni sude,
Your Honor, I plead not guilty.
Very well.
Count 8, cruel treatment, a violation of the laws or customs of war, as recognized by Common Articles 3.1a of the Geneva Conventions of 1949, and punishable under Articles 3 and 7.1 and 7.3 of the Statute of the Tribunal.
Général.
General, do you plead guilty or not guilty to count 8?
časni sude, nisam
I plead not guilty.
Très bien.
Very well.
Count 9, attacks on civilians, a violation of the laws or customs of war, as recognized by Article 51 of Additional Protocol 1 and Article 13 of Additional Protocol 2 to the Geneva Conventions of 1949, punishable under Articles 3, 7.1, 7.3 of the Statute of the Tribunal.
Général.
General, do you plead guilty or not guilty to count 9?
časni sude,
Your Honor, I plead not guilty.
Pouvez vous asseoir?
You may be seated for the moment, General.
Madame la greffière, pouvez...
Madam Registrar, would you proceed, please?
Counts 10 through 12. Unjustified devastation, unlawful attacks on civilian objects, destruction or willful damage to historic monuments and institutions dedicated to religion. Between the 1st of October 1991 and the 6th of December 1991, Pavle Strugar, acting individually or in concert with others, planned, instigated, ordered, committed, or otherwise aided and abetted in the destruction or willful damage to dwellings and other buildings in the city of Dubrovnik. The J&A positions on the high ground to the east and north of Dubrovnik provided them with an unobstructed view of the city and its environs. From these positions and from naval vessel offshore, the J&A forces under the command of Pavle Strugar and others engaged in unlawful shelling of civilian targets in Dubrovnik, including but not limited to the following attacks. The shelling on the 23rd to the 24th of October 1991 of the city of Dubrovnik, during which the Old Town area was targeted for the first time. The shelling on 8th through the 13th of November 1991 of the entire city of Dubrovnik, during which the Old Town, Lapad, and Grus were targeted. A number of buildings in the Old Town were damaged, as were hotels housing refugees and other civilian structures in other parts of the city. The shelling on the 6th of December 1991 of the entire city of Dubrovnik, but during which the Old Town area was specifically targeted. At least 6 buildings in the Old Town were destroyed in their entirety, and hundreds more suffered damage. Hotels housing refugees and other civilian structures were severely damaged or destroyed in other parts of Dubrovnik, but specifically in the Lapad and Babin Kulk areas. During the course of the attacks on Dubrovnik between the 1st of October 1991 and the 6th of December 1991, approximately 1,000 shells fired by the J&A forces impacted in the Old Town area in the city. The Old Town district of Dubrovnik was a UNESCO World Cultural Heritage Site in its entirety. A number of the buildings in the Old Town and the towers on the city walls were marked with symbols mandated by the Hague Convention on the Protection of Cultural Property in the event of armed conflict, 1954. No military targets were located on or within the walls of the Old Town. By these acts and omissions, Pavle Strugar participated in...
General,
General, would you rise, please?
Count 10. Devastation not justified by military necessity, a violation of the laws or customs of war, punishable under Articles 3b and 7.1 and 7.3 of the Statute of the Tribunal.
General,
General, do you plead guilty or not guilty to count 10?
Časni sud.
Your Honor, I plead not guilty.
oui, très bien, continuez.
Very well, proceed, please.
Count 11. Unlawful attacks on civilian objects, a violation of the laws or customs of war, as recognized by Article 52 of Additional Protocol 1 to the Geneva Conventions of 1949, punishable under Article 3 and 7.1 and 7.3 of the Statute of the Tribunal.
General,
General, do you plead guilty or not guilty to count 11?
Časni sude.
Your Honor, I plead not guilty.
Count 12. Destruction or willful damage done to institutions dedicated to religion and to historic monuments, a violation of the laws or customs of war, punishable under Articles 3d and 7.1 and 7.3 of the Statute of the Tribunal.
General, plaidez-vous coupable?
General, do you plead guilty or not guilty to count 12, 11 being the one right before that?
Časni sude.
Your Honor, I plead not guilty.
General, vous pouvez...
General, you may be seated for the time being to rest. Madam Registrar, would you continue?
Counts 13 through 16. Extensive destruction and appropriation of property, wanton destruction of villages, destruction or willful damage done to institutions dedicated to education and religion, plunder of public or private property. In October of 1991, the JNA forces, under the command of Pavle Strugar and others, seized and occupied Croatian territory in the proximity of the city of Dubrovnik. This part of Dubrovnik region included, in whole or in part, the areas of Konavle, Supa, Dubravka, and Primorje. Croatian forces defending these areas were small in number and were lightly armed, consisting primarily of local villagers mobilized shortly before the attack. Any resistance that the Croats offered to the attacking JNA forces was quickly overcome, and they then withdrew back toward the city of Dubrovnik. As a result, the JNA took control of the area without having to engage in intense combat. After JNA forces occupied the areas surrounding Dubrovnik, troops under the command of Pavle Strugar and others systematically plundered public, commercial, and private properties in the areas under their control. Much of this property was transported to Montenegro in JNA military vehicles, and the army therefore instituted measures to track and maintain the looted property. J&A forces also systematically destroyed public, commercial, and religious buildings, as well as private dwellings in the areas around Dubrovnik. This destruction took place after the cessation of fighting, when the areas were securely under the control of the J&A. Villages in the occupied areas that were extensively damaged or were totally destroyed include, but not limited to, Bertgat, occupied by the J&A on or about the 24th of October, 1991. Chilipi, occupied by the J&A on or about the 6th of October, 1991. Dubravka, occupied by the J&A on or about the 2nd of October, 1991. Gruda, occupied by the J&A on or about 4th of October, 1991. Mochichi, occupied by the J&A on or about the 6th of October, 1991. Osyanik, occupied by the J&A on or about the 18th of October, 1991. Slano, occupied by the J&A on or about the 4th of October, 1991. And Zekovica, occupied by the J&A on or about the 7th of October, 1991. By these acts and omissions, Pavle Strugar has participated in.
Would you rise, please, General?
Count 13, extensive destruction and appropriation of property not justified by military necessity and carried out unlawfully and wantonly, a grave breach of the Geneva Conventions of 1949, punishable under Articles 2D, 7.1, and 7.3 of the Statute of the Tribunal.
General,
General, do you plead guilty or not guilty to count 13?
Časni sude, nisam.
Not guilty, Your Honor.
Count 14, wanton destruction of villages or devastation not justified by military necessity, a violation of the laws or customs of war, punishable under Articles 3B and 7.1 and 7.3 of the Statute of the Tribunal.
General,
General, do you plead guilty or not guilty to count 14?
Not guilty, Your Honor.
Count 15, destruction or willful damage done to institutions dedicated to education or religion, a violation of the law or customs of war, punishable under Articles 3D and 7.1 and 7.3 of the Statute of the Tribunal.
General,
General, do you plead guilty or not guilty to count 15?
Časni sud,
Not guilty, Your Honor.
Count 16, plunder of public or private property, a violation of the laws or customs of war, punishable under Articles 3E and 7.1 and 7.3 of the Statute of the Tribunal.
General,
General, do you plead guilty or not guilty to count 16?
izjašnjavate krivim ili da niste krivi po 16. tačci optužnice.
časni sude,
Not guilty, Your Honor.
General,
General, you may be seated. We have noted that General Pavel Strugar has pleaded not guilty to all the counts. Madam Registrar, please take note that General Pavel Strugar has pleaded non-guilty to all of the counts. I would now like to turn to the Office of the Prosecutor to recall several points. Madam Corder, in respect of Rule 66 of the rules, that is disclosure by the prosecutor. Have you already carried out the disclosure, or are you doing so at this time?
We have given today, not to Mr. Rodic, but to his partner, I believe, Mr. Petrovich, to whom I've spoken, the supporting materials. They're not yet translated. I wouldn't like to guarantee that they'll be translated within 30 days, knowing the state of the translation department as I do. But the actual materials in English have been given to the defense.
Très bien.
Very well. You may be seated. I turn to Mr. Rodic. Pursuant to Rule 72 of the rules, as you know, preliminary motions must be filed in writing at the latest 30 days after the prosecutor has disclosed to the defense all the supporting materials and statements under Rule 66. In light of the case law of the tribunal and the indictment, I have two questions to ask. Do you have anything to say in respect of what Madam Joanna Cornes just said? And do you intend to file any preliminary motions, or is it too early to answer those questions?
Vaša vistost,
Your Honor, it's true that my learned friend from the prosecution handed the supporting materials to the defense just before this initial appearance. I saw this material. It is in the English language, working language of the tribunal, and I will sign to having received it after we're done. But even before you put this question, I intended to clarify, to make it absolutely clear that the defense will submit its preliminary motion as to certain deficiencies in the indictment, but we believe that the time allowed for filing this should run from the day when these materials are delivered to the accused in the language that he understands. And because it is on the basis of that that we will be preparing our preliminary motion.
Oui, très bien.
Very well. Mr. Rodic, you may be seated. Having heard this, Madam Corder, do you have any idea about when you will have these documents translated?
Your Honour, I don't. I know that Your Honour and everyone else in this tribunal are aware of the appalling difficulties that the translation unit are undergoing at the moment. I believe, but I'm not entirely sure, that some materials have already been translated, but I wouldn't like to give a guarantee as to any date at the moment. The only thing I would say is that, of course, matters affecting the validity of the indictment wouldn't really be a matter of evidence. So I'm not quite clear why the accused would need to be able to read all the supporting material for a motion to be drafted, but I obviously don't object if Your Honour's minded to make a ruling that the time should run from the time of translation being received. While I'm on my feet, could I mention one other matter? The documents have been disclosed on the basis that they won't be further disclosed by the defence. We will be lodging a motion for protective measures in respect of that material.
Zahtjev da se donesu zaštitne mjere.
Okay, très bien.
Very well. For the time being, I do not think that we can go any further in respect of scheduling the pretrial work. That is the pretrial phase. As you know, pretrial case can begin only after disclosure. There is something useful that I could tell you. That is, after having consulted my colleagues in the chamber, I have appointed myself as pretrial judge, so that somebody will be available to answer any questions that might arise urgently. This is the information I have for you. I would like to suggest to you that the parties contact one another to discuss these issues, and particularly the suggestion raised by Mrs. O'Connor having to do of whether you want to file preliminary motions. That's fine. You simply have to agree on whether you're going to. You have the right to have the exhibits translated. Rule 66 clearly says that, subject to the provisions of Rules 53 and 69, the prosecutor shall make available to the defense in a language which the accused understands, within 30 days of the initial appearance of the accused, copies of the supporting material which accompany the indictment when confirmation was sought, as well as all prior statements obtained by the prosecutor from the accused, etc. But it is true that this is a right of the accused. Yet, if the accused wishes a fair and expeditious trial, this can happen only if you make concessions. I can tell you clearly, Mr. Rodic, that this is only a suggestion and you have the right to do otherwise. This is a right which you can exercise if you like. The translation problem, however, to some extent, will set the conditions for opening the trial, as you can imagine, and that is why I'm making that suggestion to you. And if you feel that it is appropriate to speak to me, you can do so through the legal officer of the chamber who's here, that is Mr. Olivier Formy, and if necessary, we could organize a status conference immediately and at any time that you would choose in order to find a way to expedite the case and to resolve the issue. Mr. Rodic, you know that the translation service has a great deal of work right now, but that we are trying to find a solution, and I think that the solution could be found in a spirit of cooperation. And therefore, it is up to you, if I can say it that way, to speak with one another and to communicate with the pretrial judge if you need to do so. This means that I am now not going to set a date for the pretrial stage, but simply say that I would be available if you should need me. In conclusion, I would like to ask the parties whether they have any other questions to raise before we close the hearing. Madam Coroner.
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Meneer
Mr. Radic.
Vaša visost,
Your Honor, thank you. I understood your message as meaning that this date, this deadline for filing my preliminary motion hasn't been set yet, hasn't begun to run yet. I will talk later to my learned friend, but I also have to consult my client to make certain things clear to him. I wanted to address you briefly. I believe what I have to say is important. I'm aware that what I'm telling you now falls within the competence of the registry and the detention unit administration in Scheveningen, but I also think it is my right and my duty to acquaint the court and you as representative of the trial chamber with the following facts. General Strugar voluntarily surrendered to the tribunal on the 21st of October, year 2000, just after he left the clinical center in Podgorica. It is the 25th of October now, and General Strugar hasn't been seen by a doctor for over a month. He is not receiving the treatment that was prescribed for him in Podgorica. For over a month, he hasn't been seen by a specialist doctor, a nephrologist, or a urologist. And his scheduled appointment was for the 19th of October. While he has been in detention, his condition has deteriorated. Even before his voluntary surrender to the tribunal in The Hague, the competent persons in the tribunal were familiar with his condition and his insistence to surrender to the tribunal, in the conviction, though, that he will receive the necessary treatment for his health. What I have to say is that over the past 5 days, he had a blood sample taken only once, and a urine sample was submitted for analysis. He hasn't received any results yet, though, and his level of serotonin in his urine has to be monitored on a regular basis. In view of his voluntary surrender and in view of his age, he is almost 70, I kindly ask the court to issue an order that the treatment of General Strugar be improved and that appropriate measures be taken to take care of his health. I hope that my request will meet with your understanding.
Thank you, Mr. Rodic. I must inform you that I have had the opportunity of inquiring into General Strugar's medical condition. I asked the registry for information, and we had a meeting, and I strongly recommended to the registry to do everything to treat properly General Strugar. We are always concerned about the health of the detainees, as you know, but as you also know, the tribunal does not have a physician, and we enjoy the cooperation of the host country. As you know, a judge is not to tell a physician what to do, but I've already strongly recommended to the registry to do everything, and to do everything quickly, so that the general can be properly treated. And I thank you for your information. And I can tell you that even before I entered this courtroom, I had already taken measures in respect of that issue, because as you know, I had scheduled asking General Strugar questions about his detention conditions. I'm going to do that now. General, would you rise, please?
Donc, peut-être sur...
In respect of the medical condition, it may not be necessary to repeat what your counsel, Mr. Rogers, has told us. I simply would like to ask you whether you would confirm what your counsel has said.
Pa ja kad sam
Well, when I complained to my lawyer, I primarily complained about this treatment. And I must say I didn't expect to be treated that way. I came out of the hospital practically exhausted because I didn't want to give up when I had already said that I would surrender to The Hague. I went to see a doctor for a banal complaint just before I was to come to The Hague, but things got complicated. I'm not the kind of man who whines and complains a lot, but I must say that I'm not feeling well, and I was hoping things would be better than they are.
Très bien.
Very well. You may be seated, General. Do you wish to add something, Mr. Rodic?
Samo da vam zahvalim vaš...
I only want to thank you, Your Honor, for the interest you displayed and for your questions. Thank you.
Très bien.
For the transcript, Madam Magistrate, please note that everything must be done quickly to ensure that General Strugar's medical condition is properly treated. I've already said that, but I want to say it yet again. Is that clear, Madam Registrar?
Yes, Mr. President.
Okay.
Very well. Since there is no other issue to deal with, I wish all success to the parties and hope that we can reach results. And I repeat that I am available to you. And I hope that the General's health condition gets better, and I would wish all of you a good afternoon.
All right. Very fully.